When I first looked at the lectionary this week and discovered that our gospel reading was the parable of the Good Samaritan, my heart sank a little. And don't get me wrong, I love the story, and the message behind it, for us as Christians, is the most important of all. But for a preacher, it poses a bit of a challenge. It's so well known. Almost everyone will have heard it before. Most of you will know it inside out. Many of you have probably been studying it for decades. How is a poor local preacher expected to wring anything new from this well-known passage? Well, on this occasion, Donald Soper has come to my rescue. But more on that later. First, let's cover off the basics. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a simple enough story. Something terrible happens to someone and they need help. Two people, religious people, come along. Jewish priests performed the traditional religious ceremonies of Judaism, and Levites held various administrative positions in the temple and were helped in giving instruction on the law and the tradition. So these individuals, you might think, would be expected to show some care and compassion, but they walk on by when they see the man in difficulty. A third man, a Samaritan, a symbol of everything that was foreign to Judaism, stopped and took care of him, giving him what he needed. And in doing that, he showed neighbourly love. And when Jesus calls on us to love our neighbour, this is the example he gives. An act of charitable kindness. No second thoughts, no worries about how it might affect the person who's giving the help. Immediate aid to somebody in need. So if we were to think about this parable as an onion, there we have our top layer of the onion that we can peel off. It's the clear, obvious meaning to people reading the passage. It then starts to take on a little bit more colour when we learn about the road they were on. Jesus sets his story on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. And Jerusalem is 2,300 feet above sea level, and the road near Jericho is about 1,300 feet below sea level. So in less than 20 miles, this road dropped 3,600 feet. It was a notoriously dangerous road. It was narrow. It had lots of bends in it. I'm sure you'll have come down mountainsides or steep hills and you'll see those roads that have got all those S-shaped curves in order to meander down. And it was the perfect place, because of all that, for bandits hiding and then jumping out at you. And this scene that Jesus was describing would have been one that was very familiar to his listeners. And the man who was robbed would probably have been regarded as pretty reckless and pretty foolish to have gone down that road on his own, instead of, as was common, going in a convoy for protection. And so the next layer that we peel off of our onion is the recognition that acting as a neighbour does not involve passing judgment. There's no hint of the Samaritan thinking, this foolish man had it coming, or he deserves what's happened here. The fact that somebody might have brought a problem on themselves is no reason to limit or restrict the neighbourly help we offer. Another layer, peeling away, might be thinking about how the Jews regarded Samaritans. They were regarded with dislike, hostility. They were viewed as unclean. The idea that a Samaritan might come out to the aid of a Jewish man when other Jews walked on by would not be easy listening for Jewish people. But by choosing a Samaritan as the one that we should emulate, the one that we should copy in what we're doing, Jesus is emphasizing that all people are neighbours. The Old Testament commandments about loving your neighbour did not mean just loving your fellow Jew. it means everyone, to the full. So those are some of the layers of the onion, and I'm sure you've probably heard those layers before. But I began by saying that Donald Soper had come to my rescue when trying to think of this passage in a slightly different way. Let me explain. Henry and I were on holiday last week. We went to Greece with Henry's family, and I took a very old book with me. It's published in 1957, a collection of talks by the Reverend Donald Soper, and it's called "It is Hard to Work for God." And with my accreditation this evening, it's maybe not the most encouraging title for someone who's about to become a local preacher. It is hard to work for God. It's kind of like telling somebody about to have an operation. This is going to hurt. Chapter 1 focuses on stepping forward to play our part in God's kingdom. And in it, Donald Soper says something that I think is quite appropriate when we're thinking about the different layers in today's passage. He says this: "Perhaps one of the most wonderful things about the Christian faith is forgiveness. Because when we have laid down all our laws and set out all our plans, we shall make mistakes, we shall fail, and there will be compromise. We shall do wrong things, and we shall fall lower than the level we've set for ourselves. There will be circumstances over which we have no control, and then we shall cast ourselves on the mercy and the love of God. And if we say to him, 'Father, I have done my best,' he will require no more from us." Now, there's a recognition here from Donald Soper that none of us are perfect. None of us will always do the right thing, the loving thing, the God-like thing. That we're fallible humans with our own weaknesses, our own distractions and faults. And when we think of the parable of the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite who walk past on the other side are often portrayed almost like pantomime villains, almost as if when we're reading in church you want to go boo and hiss at them. These are the baddies who should have known better, the baddies who should have done better. And then on the other hand, the Good Samaritan, as we call him from the title, is portrayed almost angel-like in charitable love. But when it comes to real life, is anything ever really that black and white? Our lives are full of competing pressures and distractions. Maybe the priest who walked past was preoccupied with 101 other problems from other people which had just been put on his plate. Maybe the Levite was on his way to tend to his sick friend. Maybe he was worrying he might not make it on time, or he was concerned about what he might find when he got there. Maybe they were both actually frightened for themselves because of the road that they were on. Maybe their failure to stop was to avoid putting themselves in danger. Or maybe they thought it might have been a staged trap, with the person who was robbed being in on the deception. There are a number of reasons, I suppose, aren't there, why the priest and the Levite might not have wanted to stop and might have done what they did. And those are not reasons, at least in my mind, to think of them as evil or bad. They're just humans, they're weak. They're sometimes incapable of doing the selfless thing. We refer to this as the parable of the Good Samaritan, but that's not actually in the language of Jesus. Maybe more accurate is to call it the parable of the Samaritan who did something good, or who showed love. Because at the end of the story, Jesus doesn't ask which of these three was the good person, but instead he says, which of these three do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Jesus isn't condemning the person. He's condemning the failure on that occasion to do the right thing. And we see the same in our passage from 1 John 3 today, which talks about Cain. And it doesn't say that he was evil, but that his actions were evil. There are times, I'm sure, when we too will have found ourselves in the same situation, when we walk past somebody in the street who's in need, or when somebody asks for help and we fail to provide it, when we're too busy, when we have our own priorities, when we don't have the time or the inclination to do the Christ-like thing. For many of us as humans, that self-concern will be our starting point. We're on our own paths, we're doing our own things with our own priorities, and it takes an active decision, a positive step out from what we're doing to do something for somebody else. And so I'm sure that we've all played the part of the priest or the Levite at some point in a particular situation. And it's easy then to fall into the trap of thinking, if I'm not always like the Samaritan in everything I do, then I'm a failure. Or if I've ever been the Levite or the priest, then in God's eyes, I'm a failure. But that's not what Jesus is saying. We're humans. He knows that. We're weak. We're not perfect. Jesus is not saying that if we've ever played that role before, that's who we are. He's not saying that. Jesus is challenging us for every situation in which we find ourselves. How do we love our neighbour? So while we've all been the priest, the Levite, at some point in our lives, on other occasions, I'm sure you've also been the Samaritan. The challenge for us is to play the role of the Good Samaritan more, as much as we can, and to be the priest or the Levite less. I've stood here in this pulpit before, and I've talked about different passages and reflecting God, being the mirror of God. And our challenge is to be that mirror as often as possible. And so in the end, Jesus makes three things clear to us. First, we must be prepared to help other people, even when they've caused the problem themselves. It's not our job to decide whether the outcome is deserved. It's our job to help. Second, that love that we've got to show extends to all people of all nations. And third, love is not just a pang of sympathy in our hearts. Yes, the Samaritan, we're told, was moved to pity, but he then did something about it. In a film I saw once, there's a great quote: "Kindness is love with its work boots on." Kindness is love with its work boots on. We show our love through doing, not just through feeling. So we must get our work boots on. Jesus is giving us a call to action. And that call to action is emphasized in our other two passages today. In 1 John 3, we're told this is how we know what love is. So Jesus says, love your neighbour. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And then in the passage from James, we're told, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. Both of these passages are saying, get your work boots on. But as Donald Soper calls on us to remember, when we do find ourselves, unfortunately, in the position of the priest or the Levite, then that is the time we have to cast ourselves on the mercy of God. We will fail, of course we will. But as long as our faith is well anchored, firmly tethered to Jesus' message of love, God will provide support to do the right thing and forgiveness when we fail. And talking about anchors, I mentioned that I was on holiday last week, and on one of the days we hired a little self-drive motorboat and we went out along the coast. And every now and then we'd stop, we'd throw down the anchor, and we'd enjoy the scenery. But on one occasion, after we'd finished our sandwiches and we decided to move on, we found that the boat wasn't moving properly. Something had gone wrong. So we looked at the steering wheel and the display, and that looked fine. We looked at the engine. What do we know about the engine? But it looked okay. And then we realized we hadn't lifted the anchor back up properly. It was just dangling in the water, trailing after us. And so it wasn't doing its job of holding us firm, but nor was it up and tucked away out of trouble. It was just acting as a drag on the boat, so whenever we steer, we'd get pulled all over the place. And we all have similar drags. We all have one or more anchors in our life that we regard as important. Our reputation, our appearance, our wealth, our desires, our status, whatever it might be. Many of these things are distractions that hold us back from showing the love that Jesus calls on us to show. Now, sticking with my boat analogy, we might try to drive forward on God's path, but if our anchors are worldly things that are pushing around in the water behind us, they might drag us, hold us back, take us off course, or at the very least make our journey a lot more difficult. Our anchor needs to be the love that Jesus calls on us to show. That's the only way to stay firm against life's distractions. And yes, it's an easy thing to say, isn't it? Easy thing to say, difficult to put into practice. I'm certainly guilty of failing to push aside worldly distractions in favour of neighbourly love. I'm definitely guilty of being the priest or the Levite instead of the Samaritan. And so let me end with a final passage from Donald Soper's book. I would invite you to think of God as the all-wise, all-understanding, and all-loving Father who knows what we are about. He knows the difficulties in which we inevitably find ourselves. He knows how weak we are and how impossible it is for us to see the high design of his plan. And he says to us, do your best, and if with wisdom and cooperation and fellowship you do your best, all your failures will be forgiven. Each time we're called upon, and wherever our love might be needed, let's strive to be more like the Samaritan, showing love without limit or condition. As my book's title reminds us, it is hard to work for God. So let's get our work boots on. Amen.